been 1 year since Phillip became the mayor of the Isle of Palms. He tells me what he's accomplished in his first year and what he wants to accomplish next for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Isle of Palms Mayor Phillip. Welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Quintin, good morning. Thank you for having me back. Always a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Likewise, you are the mayor of the Isle of Palms and have been since 2022. Let me shoot. Who's Phillip 1 year later as mayor?
I could say less hair, but if we went back to the video from last year, I think it would be quite similar. It's certainly been a learning curve year, Quintin. Kind of a straight up learning curve, quite honestly. But it's all been good. Our staff just recently completed a 2022 accomplishments report that we'll be posting to our website today. So all in all, good. I think a good year. Hopefully, a little wiser than when we met, this time last year. But all good.
All good. And I know we met last week over at the City Hall when I was over there for work. But let me ask you this. You talk about that learning curve. What exactly are those learning curves right now?
Yeah, I think, Quintin, two things I would probably call out as primary learning curves for me in the first year. The pace of municipal government is something you have to get used to coming out of the corporate world. It's slow. There's a lot of hands in the till, if you will, particularly when you're thinking about permits or other things where multiple layers of government need to get involved or give you an okay to start a project. So I think the pace has been really eye-opening for me to think about how slow it is to get things done, which makes you, the learning curve for that, Quintin, to me, is you need to have multiple projects started, lined up, going all at the same time, just because it takes a long time to get them done. I think the second piece of learning curve for me is the amount of time, and I mentioned this to you last week, I think, is the amount of time I spend with the city council members.
Right.
Again, not trying to sway anything, just make sure people are up to speed, answer any questions, make sure we're on the same page, from an agenda and kind of procedural standpoint, because we have 4 new council members that started with me last year, that had not held political office before. So there's a lot of procedural pieces to municipal government that are peculiar to municipal government. So that's been some time commitment to make sure those folks are up to speed. So those are probably the two biggest things, Quintin.
So, Mayor, let me ask you this. What should be the pace for the city of Isle of Palms when it comes to permits and multiple projects?
Yeah. There's so much out of our control, Quintin. I'll just give you a quick example. We have a third major drainage project that we've had on the books for about a year and 8 months, fully funded and waiting on a permit from, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 acronyms in the government. Last one being the Army Corps of Engineers. And I think that's what drives some of the pace, Quintin, is you're waiting on so many people and or entities and it's all outside of Isle of Palms' control, and every municipality has the same issue. I would love the pace to be quicker. I mean, some of these drainage projects we will finish or start this year. We initiated when I was on Planning Commission 5 years ago. So you think about, from concept to engineering to funding to permitting, and on the third one, we're going to finally put a shovel in the ground this fall. It's a slow process that, unfortunately, a lot of it's out of our control.
So you say it's fully funded. How much money have you all been able to get from that for this drainage project?
Yeah, so we have 2 outfall projects that we started last year that will finish this year. The third one, again, this permit we just got that will start this fall. I think those 3 projects, Quintin, are around $6 million, if I remember right. So pretty significant amount of money and pretty significant amount of work for us. But it's 3 outfalls into the intercoastal waterway that should help our stormwater runoff.
I want to get to that in just a second, Mayor, but let me ask you, so what is the current revenue right now for the city of Isle of Palms?
Yeah, our current annual revenue is around 24 to 25 million, Quintin.
And what are the projections for this particular year, 2023?
So our budget year runs July 1st to June 30th. Right. So that number I just gave you is for our upcoming June year-end number. Our revenue stays fairly flat in that range. So I would guess we'll probably be in the $25-ish million range for our next fiscal year. We'll start our budgeting process probably in March, April, to get that lined up for a July 1st kickoff.
Now, how do you currently accommodate, obviously, the city of Alva Palms community in an environmentally and physically sustainable manner?
Yeah, well, we have, from a financial standpoint, we have about 3 or 4 main spigots of revenue, if you will. Property tax, obviously, being one of those, accommodations tax, other tourism money. So from a sustainability, from an income flow or revenue standpoint for the city, I feel really good about where we are. These drainage projects we just mentioned, Quintin, we did take on some debt to cover those and one other project that we have going on. So there are times, particularly during the last few years, when money was so cheap from a lending or borrowing standpoint, it just made sense to not use our cash, but to use to finance a little bit of those projects. So from a sustainability financial standpoint, I feel really good about where we are in the city and about our revenue levels. And tourism has just, as you well know, been off the charts the last couple of years here in our area, thank goodness. But we budget really conservative, Quintin, and when the tourism numbers have taken off the last couple of years, the average room rate and the occupancy rates are way back up for us. So that part's been really good. I'm not sure if I fully answered your question. I think you had environmental in there as well. Just about every project or thing we do has an environmental bent to it. And this one last permit, we were waiting on this one drainage project. It is almost exclusively environmental. It's about making sure that we replenish the marshes or aren't harming anything ecological in the outfall that's going to the intercoastal. So.
And I want to get that. That's one of my questions coming up later in the interview. But okay, so how much debt has the city been able to take on?
So I think in the last 3 years, I guess, Quintin, I think we put on, maybe going off memory here just a little bit, but I think around $8 million of debt that we've done. And again, that's been at like 1.5% or 2% interest rate. So it just financially made sense to go down that path for us. The city has pretty good amount of reserves, which we could have used cash to do these projects. But again, with money being so cheap, it just made sense to do it that way.
So how much cash do you actually have on hand now?
We finished the year with right around $30 million in cash. Now, some of that, Quintin, is restricted, like for beach preservation or, tourism money that has to be spent on certain things. So there's probably, of that 30, probably about half of it is for our discretion, if you will, for projects or other things, and about half of it is restricted.
So now, with that, how much money have you spent so far on tourism initiatives?
That's a great question, because a lot of things are kind of wrapped in tourism. Everything from public safety. We're doing a ADA walkway. We're improving and putting in two parking spots at 34th Avenue for us. And to me, all of that's kind of wrapped into the experience, whether it's a resident experience or a tourist experience. Quintin, I don't know that I would have a hard number right off the top of my head on what we spent on tourism-specific money, because we do use some of the tourism money to pay a couple of firefighters, a couple of police staff, because we have additional staff, obviously, to handle the crowds that come during the summer.
So going back to summer of 2022, obviously, love summer, by the way, how much money did you all have to spend on additional staff?
Usually in the summer, on our police side, we add about 10 what we call beach service officers, and they're primarily focused on making sure traffic flow is good, parking are adhered to, parking rules are adhered to, beach rules are adhered to. So those folks are with us usually pretty much our season, March through September. So that's about 10 staff members that we have on that go off after the season stops. So from a temporary standpoint, that's really about the only staff we add. our police and fire staffs are, we've all struggled, all the cities have struggled with maintaining staffing there and employment and finding new folks. But we probably have, just rough numbers, I would guess, Quintin, maybe 2 to 3 in each one of those departments that are extra, if you will, due to tourism and volume that we have. And again, particularly police in the summer. So that's kind of a rough number of kind of where we add for the tourism part of it.
So will those numbers and that type of, that amount of money, I should say, will that be consistent into the 2023 season?
It will. Yeah.
Okay.
The additional staff that we do on the police side has been pretty consistent the last few years. Okay. With these beach service officers. Again, just trying to make sure folks have a good experience, whether a resident or visitor here. They're not they're not a revenue producing number trying to write a bunch of tickets. They're just really trying to make sure people's experience when they come to the island is good.
So how many tickets did you all write in 2022?
I had no idea. It's certainly some number, and it's certainly a revenue number to the city, but I don't have that number off the top of my head, Quintin.
So you going back to experience, Mayor, what is the residential experience and what is the business experience when it comes to the city of Isle of Palms?
Yeah, I think, Quintin, I've heard from a number of folks. We did a lot of preseason work last year to, help traffic flow, have additional signage. We had an off-duty sheriff at our light at the end of the connector this year on busy weekends or on tourist season weekends. We did a whole lot of work with Trooper Bob and Channel 4, and they did a huge social media campaign for us and the other Barrier Island communities, just, to put out beach rules and parking rules and traffic and current weather and all kind of stuff. So, I've heard from a number of folks this year, Quintin, how much better the flow was this summer. And it was still crowded for sure. And that's mainly from residents that I've heard those comments that it was easier to get around the island, easier to get on and off the island, except for the occasional thunderstorm in the afternoon, on a Saturday or Sunday. But I'm hopeful that a lot of that preseason work that we did last year that we'll do again this year, paid some benefits, and we'll certainly do that again this year for sure.
So how many visitors actually visited the island in 2022 as far as summer?
Yeah, again, don't have a number on the top of my head, but typically we may have on a pretty weekend, Quintin, we're probably 20,000 people over the weekend, in addition to our current residents that are here. So it's pretty significant, and it's a small island, as you know. And there's only 2 ways on and off, and it's hard to manage the flow because people are coming to the beach, period, and that's great. But it's it's just something we have to keep our eye on, and it's something we have to renew ourselves to every year to make sure traffic flow is good again for visitors or residents. Residents have a hard time getting from one end of the island to the other when it's a Saturday weekend and it's packed here. And we're trying to do what we can to make that experience good for everybody.
And I want to talk more about that traffic flow in just a second. But let me go to obviously the size of council. The residents of the Isle of Palms, as you know, rejected a referendum to reduce the size of council. 480 people were for it, and then of course against them was like 1306, I believe. Council right now will stay at 9. Okay, right. Mayor, looking back then to right now, when you think of this, obviously this referendum, isn't the idea of reducing the size of council similar to, say, gerrymandering to ensure that the will of the majority will prevail over the will of the majority?
Yeah, and that got born out of kind of looking around at what other municipalities were doing in the state, Quintin. And for our size city, we were just way out of line for number of residents versus number of city council seats. And all our city council seats are at large, so there's not districts or areas that you're running for. It's the whole island. So, we had kicked this around on council for probably the last 2 or 3 years. It had also been brought up about 8 or 9 years ago and never got to a referendum. So, to me, it was just time to let us, we're out of line with where the rest of the state is from other cities our size or even bigger cities. And to me, it was just time. Let's let the residents decide how they want to be represented. And they obviously spoke loud and clear. So that's what we'll do going forward.
Now, by decreasing council representation, and this is probably a redundant question, Mayor, does that conveniently and theoretically eliminate the two members that have not supported that rhetoric?
No, not at all. And again, Quintin, it got defeated, so we're going to stay at 9 council members going forward.
Yes, sir.
So it doesn't really matter what could or might have happened because it's going to stay at 9. Again, with the elections being at large here, it's there's really no way for that to happen, quite honestly. I mean, you run your campaign, and whether you're for or against something, you're running a campaign trying to get elected. And it's not a district, it's not a location, it's not an area, it's the whole island. So, whether we have 7 or 9, that in my head doesn't come into play. It was just a matter of, do we as a city want to get more in line with what's going on around our state? And again, the residents spoke and said no, so we'll stay at 9 and keep going.
Now, okay, if they argue that a 7-member council is better than a 9-member council, why not make a 5-member council if they are so concerned that smaller is better?
Yeah, well, and again, to me, this conversation's kind of over. Not mine and yours, but the one around the number of council members. Again, to me, the residents spoke and they would like it at 9. For our size city, Quintin, to your exact question. You look at Sullivan's or other cities, in the less than 5,000 resident range, and 5 is a very frequent number of council members. And if I had my wish, that's probably where I would take it at some point in life. But again, this conversation is over and done from a resident and referendum standpoint. They've decided they would like to keep it at 9, and so that's where we'll stay. That's part of the democratic process, and it worked great. And like I say, we'll keep it there and keep rocking.
Now, what else should the Isle of Palms be in line with when it comes to the rest of the state?
Yeah, and Quintin, not always does. You look at all the cities less than 5,000, more than 5,000, and just kind of see what's going on. Our city is such a interesting, peculiar mix because again, cities our size typically don't have the size budget that we have that comes from tourism money. So it's not always an apples and apples comparison when you're looking at other municipalities. That one was kind of obvious to me from a council size standpoint. Other things, I feel like we're in decent shape. Again, for our size city, our fire and police are a little bit bigger than you might think they should be. But again, it's all about the visitors that we have during the season. I think if you looked at other cities that were 2,000 to 3,000 full-time permanent residents, you would see a much smaller public safety world. You might be outsourcing your public works department. You might be leveraging the county for more things. But again, it just doesn't fit our scenario given the revenue numbers that we have and the visitors that we have coming to the island.
Obviously, tourism is a big thing right now on Isle of Palms, and you have the money for all of that. So, theoretically speaking, Mayor, if you all didn't have that money and the resources, what would you have to leverage from the county as far as public safety?
Yeah, you see some cities, Quintin, use the county for their police coverage. We're fortunate enough to have a great staff and a great chief and a lot of great equipment. And that's the way we'll do it. But I think that's one example of where if we were, didn't have this tourism engine that we have on the island, that you might be leveraging the county more that way. Again, you look at like a Sullivan's Island that outsources their public works for the most part. We've got a great staff that does that for our island today, and some of that's tourism related money that we use for that for sure. But again, we're a little bit different in the size city. When you look at, to your question, other municipalities, it just those things just don't fit for us. So again, I think the council number was an easy look and to see where you were a little bit out of line with other communities. These other ones to me are a little more explainable, like the public safety that you just asked about, public works. We've got a great rec department and a facility that a lot of cities our size just wouldn't have, but we're just fortunate enough to have some of those things here, and it's great. So.
Yes, sir. Well, let me get back to politics really quickly, Mayor. I know some people on the island have reportedly complained about day trippers, but some also want to increase the hotel and vacation rentals on the island. So, How do they make this make sense?
Yeah. I love the way you ask questions, Quentin. That is the delicate balance on the island, is certainly the number of, we've got the Wild Dunes Resort, which is a big engine for the island as well. And you have a good number of short-term rentals, with the condos as well as single family homes. Quentin, we're starting a process on Monday night. Will be our first workshop specifically targeted to short-term rentals. We've had listening sessions last year. We've had some surveys done. We've had somebody from College of Charleston come talk to us about, what's going on a little more globally. But City Council really hasn't taken it up as a topic on what we need to do, if anything, from limiting the numbers or different enforcements of the rules that are on the books or new rules that we need to put on the books that are focused on livability, if you will, for residents or visitors. So we've got 2 sessions scheduled for this month to singularly focus on the short-term rental. You've seen Sullivan's has dealt with that over the years. Folly's in the middle of dealing with short-term rentals right now. I've got a call from the Edisto mayor. I'm not sure if they're getting ready to start looking at short-term rentals or some type of limits and such. Kiowa's already done it. So I'm not sure where we're headed specifically, Quentin, from a policy or a change standpoint. But to your specific question, one of the things we have to be really careful of is tinkering with the economics on this island, because it is pretty delicate balance between full-time residents, the Wild Dunes Resort, the business community, short-term rentals. To your point, and anytime you start moving any of those dials in any direction, you're potentially going to affect short or long term your revenue streams and livability and other things that may be happening on the island. So I want us to come at this really thoughtfully, without lines in the sand, and just have an open dialogue as a council and look at the data that's in front of us and get to a good conclusion, whatever that may be. We heard loud and clear from about 150, 160 residents last year at these listening sessions. And that's certainly another piece, the big piece that goes into this equation is, what do our residents want? What are they thinking about short-term rentals or livability on the island? Or issues that we may have with current ordinances, or the ones that we may need to change, Quentin. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, but it's a big topic that is obviously in front of us and other communities around the country and around the world that are dealing with short-term rentals in the tourism industry.
Let me break that down a little bit, Mayor. So why wasn't this on the radar for council 2-3 years ago?
Quentin, it's been on the radar for about 20 years, to be quite honest with you. And the city of Isle of Palms, I think it's 21 years ago maybe, was one of the first cities to require business license for a short-term rental property. That started in 2000 or 2001, somewhere in there. Then the city started looking at, minimizing the size houses you could build on the island, or the lot coverage, or the occupancy numbers, or the number of cars you could have. So all that's been happening for about the last 15 years, Quentin. So, and all of that to me is aimed at livability on the island, again, for residents or visitors that are coming here. So again, it's another one of those delicate balance items that you really just have to make sure, everybody can win to the most part in this game, but really making sure we can maintain the residential feel of the island. You think about right in the middle of the island where our recreation center is, historically has been a very residential area. And that's why we put the parking plan in place in 2015 to protect parking from those residential areas where you had kids on bikes and playing basketball and doing what kids do in the street. It's just a delicate balance of trying to make sure we can maintain that residential feel, make sure we can have tourists come and join us and be okay without too many rules over the top of them, but enjoy their vacation. So it's a delicate balance. But again, I think it's something the city's been working on for about 20 plus years, quite honestly.
Now, I want to get to 2015 in just a second, but obviously on May 13th, 2022, me and you spoke in your office there at City Hall in Isle of Palms. You told me here on Quintin's close-up that, quote, livability of the island is the key, and protecting the residents of the island is important, unquote. So if that is the case, Mayor, then if these proposed ordinances are not adopted, wouldn't potential overdevelopment cause more stress and obviously strain and safety issues for residents and visitors.
Yeah, and you're right, Quentin. I mean, it is a balance for sure. So what we did after that conversation you and I had in May, you're probably familiar. We had a ordinances passed for Wild Dunes specific to limit any future development there. That was a huge step, and there's not a lot of acreage left in the Wild Dunes or really anywhere on the island for future development. There could be some redevelopment for sure. So the steps we took in Wild Dunes was a big piece to me of what you just asked about future development. This island has had short-term rentals since the island was created, 100 years ago. So again, it is an engine with regard to the economics on this island that has been critical for years and has helped keep our tax rates really low on the Isle of Palms compared to other communities. So we know we have short-term rentals. We've had them forever. We'll continue to have them. It's just, what is that mix between short-term rentals, full-time residents, second homeowners? What's that mix that feels good on the island, to your point, to make sure livability is good, to make sure everybody can coexist in a good way? And again, that's the delicate balance that other communities have been dealing with too, by putting caps on short-term rentals or other rules in place to make sure you can control that livability as much as possible.
Okay, may I have Zoom is giving me 11 minutes, so I got to go jump into some good questions.
Go fast.
Okay,
Yep.
so what is the current tax base for the city of Isle of Palms?
Our millage is about 23 mills, I think, which is really, really low, Quentin. Property taxes as a source of revenue for the city is pretty small in the grand scheme of things, believe it or not, even given the number of houses we have out here and the size houses that we have. Property taxes are probably, again, going off memory, $5-ish million of our $25 million revenue budget. So again, you can see how much money is coming from tourism or other areas, to get to that $25 million number for IOP.
So, now let me ask you this. Will the city of the Isle of Palms actually create a business preservation alliance?
Not sure I know what you're specifically asking. IOP did put together a chamber of commerce that kicked off last year for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
They've been working pretty hard with the Charleston Visitors Bureau, and they've been a great partner to get them up and running. The city helped, prop them up a little bit financially. So I'm hopeful that will be a really good chamber and a really active chamber. They spent 2022, Clinton, really getting their membership in place and structure in place and websites and such. So I'm looking for good things for them for 23. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but I think that's a big piece to make sure the business community has a good, loud, unified voice to the city.
So how many members are a part of this Chamber of Commerce so far?
Last I heard, I think they were in the mid-20s as far as members, Quentin. Which is really good for our size island. You think about the number of businesses that are here. I think that's a decent number. I'm not sure what their goal was, from a membership standpoint after the first year. But when I heard they were in the mid-20s, I thought that was pretty decent compared to what sits on the island today from a business standpoint.
Yeah, and I saw some new businesses up there right by the Public Works building too. They have the construction company there, so there's a lot of new businesses coming.
That's right. Yeah.
So let me ask you this, Mayor: what areas on the Isle of Palms could be ideal for future redevelopment?
So just real quick, Quentin, off the top of my head, the city owns 2 pieces of property on Front Beach that are currently municipal parking lots. We won't change that from a parking standpoint, but there's been, some conversation about, could you make that a multi-use property? Parking on the bottom, retail or something on the top, or vice versa. But, just to look at options. Those are pretty good chunks of land that are sitting right there at Front Beach that are pretty valuable that the city bought years ago. That's got potential. I mean, there's people that would love to keep the island exactly like it is right now, and I completely understand that. From a look and feel and development standpoint, and Front Beach is pretty developed and crowded, as you saw last week already. So that's one area. And Quentin, there are really very few pieces of commercial property left on the island. There are very few residential lots left on the island. I mean, there's onesies, twosies, and you're seeing a lot of tear down, on the residential side as well. We've got the huge county park on the island. That's a very valuable piece of property that, again, is just a nice thing the county did in purchasing that property and creating, 400 plus parking spots for folks to come to. I mean, otherwise that would be a huge development area right there for sure. But that won't happen. But so long-winded answer again to your question. There's not a lot of land left.
Yeah.
But I think the municipal lots downtown that the city owns, I think there's future conversations that may happen there.
So what are those conversations now?
Not much. There was a little bit end of 21, early 22, Quintin, just from should we hire, somebody just to come in and give us ideas of what it could be. We need to maintain the parking for sure in those two lots. And how could you maintain parking, create some kind of retail space? Could it be supported by the residents and visitors? Again, kind of back to that delicate balance. We have a lot of restaurants on this island for the size full-time residents we have, so they are obviously propped up by the tourism visitors. So you don't want to overdevelop and not have a good experience for everybody from a business community standpoint. So again, it's a delicate balance that I think we got to really be sure we don't mess up, if you will.
Has that area, the French Beach area, has that been overdeveloped to max in your point? I mean, in your mind, I should say?
No, I don't think so at this point. Again, I think it's a nice mix right now between, the condos that are there, the restaurants that are there. The Windjammer's been there for over 50 years now. So I think it's a good mix of what's there, Quintin. I would just start getting concerned if we said, okay, let's get 6 more restaurants or, bars or whatever right there on Front Beach. Somewhere we don't have the population to support more and more and more. And, again, you can only fit so many tourists on the island at any given time, to your question earlier in the interview. So, again, I think you just have to be really cognizant of that balance between what can be supported Front Beach or anywhere else on the island by full-time residents and knowing that there is a number of months where you don't have those visitors coming here that, a business would have to survive.
So, I hate to ask this question because it's a future discussion, obviously, but what could be supported in that area by the residents right now?
I don't know that much could, Quintin. I'll be quite honest with you. I think we have a good balance of number of businesses, number of restaurants, bars on the island. I think it's a good balance right now, and I would be concerned to do much more, to be quite honest with you, at that Front Beach area. I think could you, one idea that was kicked around, could you put parking on the bottom and some kind of green space on the top? You see that in Boston and some other major metropolitan cities where, it's bocce ball or it's a soccer field or it's, something that's not a hard space and something that's not retail, to your question, but something that could be for the enjoyment of residents or tourists alike. So, I think those are the type of conversations that need to happen as opposed to just more development. What could be unique, what could be different, that may not necessarily be a business community type setup.
And Mayor, let me go back down to Breach Inlet where I was. I let the viewers know I don't drive, so I was walking. Well, I walked from Rifle Range over the Ben Sawyer Bridge to Sullivan's Island, Jasper Boulevard over to Breach Inlet, and obviously I went over to the Isle of Palms. But let me ask you this: do you think, Mayor, $100 for a ticket for a minor parking infraction is fair, considering the average is obviously statewide $30?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Quintin. And there's a current lawsuit involved, so I'm not going to say a lot about that.
Sure.
But when our parking fines were significantly lower, it did not deter behavior at all. People, to your point, $30, $40. Well, that's just a day's worth of parking somewhere. So I'll just go to the beach, and if I get a ticket, big deal. To me, we needed to raise the number, in my opinion, to modify behavior. We've got spots up and down, Breach Inlet that you saw, those are free. Well, everything's free except right down at Front Beach. The ones up and down Palm where you need to fit as many people in as possible, as orderly as possible, without a whole lot of dividers and bumpers and signage. We do have a lot of signage, but the fines we had in place were not a deterrent to people's behavior. So we needed to do something to, again, ensure we could max out the parking and get as many people on Palm as we possibly could, or the avenues on other parts of the island. Again, that's up for debate, certainly, on how much a fine needs to be or should be. But there's current litigation going on against the Isle of Palms with this right now.
Right. But let me ask you this: what data did you all use to determine this, as far as this, minor parking infraction fine?
Yeah, a lot of this came in conversations with our police staff, for sure. They're the ones on the front line seeing the behavior change or not. Seeing people kind of throw tickets away or not, when it was a lower number, because it just didn't matter to them. So a lot of that was in conjunction with our public safety folks, Quintin.
And Mayor, let me go back to that, because I'm looking at Breach Inlet right now in my mind. But will the city do anything to provide public parking on Ocean Boulevard on the end of the island towards Breach Inlet?
That is. I don't think that's going to be open for public parking. It's a heavy residential area, and there's the right of ways, kind of squishy in a lot of those areas on Ocean. That's why we added not added, but there were some spots added last year to the Breach Inlet parking lot right there at the bridge. We've got most of the avenues have enough right of way where you can park at least on one side or the other of the road. I feel like we're pretty maxed out from a parking on the highways standpoint, Quintin, and provide a whole lot of parking for folks. So,
yes, sir. And when exactly? I just have 1 minute left here. But when exactly will the city submit its update to the local comprehensive beach management plan to DHEC?
Yep. So that's happened within the last. I don't know. I think, Quintin, it might have been somewhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas that was actually submitted. So this is our 5-year update to your question, and we'll be out there for public comment. It may be out there now. I'm not sure, but it has been filed as far as an update. But not any changes. Keeping parking as is, and keep doing what we're doing.
And I wanted to talk to you about the Isle of Palms Connected, which we talked about in depth last week. And I wanted to talk to you about Beach Reach, and obviously the Isle of Palms County Park, with the Charleston County Park being closed temporarily for renovations. But I hope to get you back later this year to talk about that in depth. But for now, Isle of Palms Mayor Phillip Pounds, thank you for your time here on Quintin's Close-Ups.
All right, Quintin, have a good day. Thanks as always.
Likewise.